Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes, a vibrant rural hub that supports making, telling and sharing stories in all art forms.
Today, Michelle's going to share with us some really interesting and important stories of her own, but things that I really think that we can all identify with, because it's about identity in different stages of our lives and how life's events can influence us in what we do in our next steps. So just before I ask you to read an extract from your book, Michelle, to set the scene where we're going with this, you said in your book that it's for your mother, Esme. Can you tell us a little bit about Esme?
Thanks, Kath, and hello, everyone. My mother was very stoic, a woman of those years, I would say, born after the Depression, and was very serious but very loved, was very active in her Anglican church. We lived right across the road from the church. And I've dedicated the book to her because it's such a vital part of the story, and our mothers are the centre core of our identity, that first attachment between mother and child. And for many years, I couldn't come to terms with any of that. So I wanted to dedicate it to her and have it released on Mother's Day of this year as sort of the ultimate honour for her. But we'll hear more about her as we will go along.
Yes. Okay, so the 26th of January 2016, Michelle, was really a day that really was the start of you unravelling your life thus far, wasn't it?
It was.
And in many ways, you've gone to places that you never realised you were going to go in search of who you are and where you are 8 years on. So we just thought that, Michelle, just to give you a bit of an idea of what happened on that 26th of January 2016, Michelle's going to read that first chapter. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is part 1, Family Secrets. The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. It's Ezekiel 8, chapter 18, verse 2. Chapter 1, Ground Zero. I'm not a mother. I'm not a partner or soulmate. I'm no longer a daughter. I'm not a sister. I'm not a widow or divorced. I'm not a next of kin. And I'll never be a grandmother. I look at the clock. It's 10:06 a.m. on Tuesday, the 26th of January 2016. Music is softening the room. God is waiting for this particular track, Adele singing Make You Feel My Love, to finish before finally hitting stop on Chris's life. He admired this song, basking in the tone and depth of her voice. Together and separately, we'd made our own meaning of the lyrics, but none of that mattered now. There's a particular silence in the moment. As you wait for another breath, I'm holding mine. Chris wrapped in my arms. I watch, searching for the next rise of his body, and finally he is still. There is no next breath. The music has softened the room, and now there is no sound, no longer any laboured breathing. For the first time in my life, I'm experiencing being in the presence of another human being as their soul departs their physical body. Chris was a believer in the old-style analogue alarm clock. One sits on the shelf next to the bed and continues to tick, 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 as if this is a regular day. It's not a regular day. Yes, the sun is shining in from the garden, working its way between each leaf, pushing its way into the room to witness the final event. There is nothing regular about this. Chris is my person, my constant companion, the one human who knows as much of my story as I do. There is no label for who I am now. 5 minutes ago, I was his carer, his enduring power of attorney, the first point of contact, the person he trusted with his life. There is no life for me to tend now. I'm just the friend. I have been the other set of ears at all his medical appointments. I've sat in the cafe with my best girlfriend Beck as we waited out the hours while his surgery was performed. I'm the person the surgeon called to say the operation was successfully over. Now I'm just the friend. Friend. This one word cannot possibly convey the depth and complexity of the dynamic between Chris and me. As the friend, my grief doesn't have an acceptable place to fit. Had I still been his partner, de facto, lover, my grief would be recognised, expected, accepted, listened to. How will I explain to people what life will be like for me now? My heart has been fraying for weeks, and all I want to do is lie here with him in a private moment of honour and peace. But I can't. His number 2 daughter is here. I'll leave you to have a moment with your dad, I say, and regretfully leave them. The spell is broken. This is it. Heading to the kitchen, I'm resetting my head. Yesterday the doctor gave me a to-do list in anticipation of this moment. With each pace down the hallway, I'm stepping back into my mantle of capable, organised, reliable, professional Michelle. Of course you've got this.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you.
And really that day was really the catalyst, wasn't it, for you, for that unravelling that you talk about and that loss of identity. I should say here at this point that Michelle is actually my sister-in-law. Her man and my man are brothers, and so we are sister-in-laws. And so at the start of this year, Michelle's book arrived on our doorstep through the Australia Post, and it said, "Dear Paul and Kath, how many times did you say I should write a book, Paul?" And here she is. I think Chris would be quite proud, and I hope Hush offers you some new perspectives. And I think that's what today is about. I know it certainly has for Paul and I. And you've said, "With love and gratitude, Michelle," and that was on Mother's Day 2024. So what we're hoping to do in the next half hour is hear how you've unravelled, how you've had to find your new identity without losing your old one, because there's still, we have our heavenly parents and brother, the heavenly brother, heavenly partner in Chris. There are secrets that you've had to face, traumas. But here we are today with this as testament that you've gone to a dark place, but you're back.
I'm back.
Yes.
I'm unhushing.
That's right.
Unhushing the secrets.
Yes. So let's start with the day that this happened, how you feel like you lost your identity. Could you share that a bit?
Well, I think it's the thing about labels, isn't it? You know, we play many roles. We have labels, and when I commenced that reading, it was all the labels that I didn't have, and it was very difficult at this time. I was overlooked in terms of my role in Chris's life with so many people, you know, in like officially and all, you know, real estate agents, all sorts of things. And the grief unsettled me, and I didn't have any usual frameworks of families and groups and connections to help me get back. And I mean, I'd already lost my parents, so it wasn't the first death. It wasn't the first funeral I'd organised by any means. It wasn't the first house that I'd had to prepare for sale or any of those things. But this grief felt different, very different. And I found myself isolating. All those things that people in grieving will tell you, not sleeping, cutting yourself off, isolating yourself, and being caught up in your own grief. I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't push through it. And it's not that I wasn't skilled. I couldn't. I couldn't. And eventually it derailed a client call, and this person said to me, I think you need to see somebody. And I did. And in doing that, I saw a therapist, a talk therapy, somebody who was experienced in narrative coaching. And when I introduced myself to her for the first time in my life, I heard myself saying, well, you know, I think I'm grieving for the children I haven't had. I think I'm grieving for the brother I didn't know I had. And I know I'm grieving for the cultural background I didn't know I had. And I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And she said to me, I've just been caring for my father on his cancer journey. I can relate to your grief. I'm married to a Jewish man, but I'm Protestant. So it was like I'd just landed in the right place. And she'd worked with narrative therapy and the power of storytelling, the way we interpret our own story, the way we tell ourselves what our identity is. And so with her, that's how I started to unlock a lot of this and to understand. It was the first time I heard the term genetic imprinting, for example.
Yes.
To understand that really at the end of the day, my grief hadn't started with me. It was a systemic grief carried through from at least 2-3 previous generations on both sides of my family.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Michelle, about this genetic imprinting? Like that's sort of a fairly new concept, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And in fact, so this was 2016, and in that year there was a book published, funnily enough, called It Didn't Start With You, which is about breaking the cycle of inherited family trauma. And that was referred to me through sometime later. I didn't know. It was still the zeitgeist of thinking at that time, and that was being published when I was going through this. But Sarah was across a lot of this. So we're all familiar with the fact that, you know, we have a DNA. Our DNA is what separates our identity out from others, even in our family. Epigenetics is the expression that impacts the sort of it sits on top of our genetic code, and it means that external factors like trauma, like famine, like our diet can actually change the way our genetic code is expressed. So if that has been something experienced in generations before, because by the way, I was raised in what I thought was a very regular, normal household. I didn't experience trauma in the way that many people who have childhood trauma may do. It was very normal. It was very silent. It was all about adults. There were secrets, but I thought it was normal. So I knew it wasn't my trauma that was causing my melancholy, but I think I was sad since the day I was born. Wow. And I recognise now that it was my mother's grief and shame, it was my father's, it was his parents, it was history.
By learning about that, did that help you then to find yourself, and sort of did it sit better for you because you'd then had this explained to you?
Well, I couldn't understand why I hadn't hit the milestones that everybody else had. You know, like I grew up fully expecting that I'd get married and I'd have at least one child and I'd have a successful career and I'd have a family. Like I'd live in a connected family, and none of that happened. I didn't understand, like it was, well, what was wrong with me?
Okay.
Why me? I'd look at people and I'd think, well, you've got it all. Now, I fully understand that you don't know what goes on behind people's front doors, but just, I just couldn't understand why I was alone in the world. Chris had been the person who knew everything about me that I knew, by the way, which was not everything. But he knew as much as I knew.
Yeah.
And now he was gone. So I didn't have that anchor. He wanted to have an overseas trip he stopped chemo in 2015 and we went to Europe, and he made me go to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin. He said, I think you need to do this. And that was when I found my grandparents in the database of those transported and murdered in a death camp. Up until that day, I did not know that.
Right.
So 2 years later, I had my DNA tested, Ancestry.com. You do that. You've got to think about that before you do it. But I'd watched SBS. I'd watched that program on SBS on Insight, where people had their DNA tested and all sorts of stories had evolved. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do that. And there it was, 50% European Jew. I didn't know that. I was raised an Anglican.
Right, so your parents that was one of the secrets that was happening at your house. Yes. Yeah.
And they collaborated to keep that secret.
Why do you think that was?
I think that was about anti-Semitism. My father had escaped Germany at the start of the war. He'd spent time in camp. I mean, I know all this now. I didn't know this growing up.
No.
I found all his documents, 10 years ago, not even 10 years ago. So I know that they had him baptised Lutheran to protect him. His mother had to convert to marry his father, and so my grandfather's, paternal grandfather's family, they had chosen Protestant to keep them safe prior to the war. So this was a systemic mode of behaviour to keep the secret. But there are also emails from other Jewish members of the family that have since surfaced that I know my father was raised with the Jewish customs. His mother was Jewish, and so he was.
Yes.
But I didn't know anything about his life prior to him meeting my mother. And so there was a shame. There was a survival. I think this is what I appreciate now in the current environment, is that when it's in your blood, it's in your blood. And you maintain the silence. You maintain the silence or you don't survive.
That's right. So there would have been that element, though, they were wanting to protect you as well.
Of course. Of course. Yeah. And I fully recognise that now. I didn't for a long time, but I do now.
I guess that's a better feel, isn't it? That you can accept what their motives were now, isn't it? Than what you felt before, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the purpose of like this for potential readers, this is the third manuscript. The first two, I was, you get hooked up, you've got to tell your story because you think your story is so important. The details of my story aren't important. What we learn from my story is what is important. And so in writing this, that's what I want to take people through, how I resolved that. So the unravelling occurred, but how did I resolve it? Mm-hmm. Because I refer to it as all the empty spaces in my heart. Now these are empty, they're still empty, but I understand now.
Yes.
And with the resolution, you then can commence any healing. Like I've been behaving the way I've been behaving for over 60 years. So the healing wasn't going to happen overnight.
No. Yes.
But with the resolution begins the healing. That's what this is about.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I bring readers along as I unpack all of this and understand you can't heal a secret in silence. You can't heal in silence. And so, and you don't need to know everything else, you don't need to know every single detail. You don't have to spend years in therapy unpacking why did they do that.
Yeah.
The fact is that they did. Joining the dots, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. That's what I did. I found all these documents, I researched, I read everything I could to understand the impact of secrets, to understand how families work and what happens when there are people missing from the family system. It creates an empty space in the family, and it's like any machine. It can't operate properly when there are people missing. So I've honoured those people now.
And I think, Michelle, already you've said people have contacted you this year, haven't you, to thank you for putting your story out there, because now it's sort of given them the courage to have a voice to talk about their own story when there's secrets involved.
Yes.
There.
Yes.
So, that's pretty powerful, isn't it?
Oh, that's my mission now. So
yes.
That is absolutely my mission. I mean, the irony of all of this is I'm a personal branding strategist, and I'd spent my many 20-year career working in corporate, helping leaders and executives work out their identity story about who they were as leaders. And I was no one knew anything about me.
That's right.
There are clients who have seen this and go, and reading and go, I had no idea. I had no idea, because I was able to
separate.
I was good at this bit.
Yes.
And I can answer a question with a question. I can deflect language. So why Mother's Day? Why my mother? Since my mother died, I couldn't do Mother's Day. I had no mother. I wasn't a mother. So, what are you doing for Mother's Day? What are you doing? I'd say. And then I'd go home and be quietly neurotic and have a drink, so to speak. But it was, I can't tell you how hard it was. So hard. This is the first year I've celebrated Mother's Day since I lost my mother, and I've birthed a book which will forever be remembered as being dedicated to my mother on Mother's Day, 2024. That's part of the honouring and part of the healing.
Yes.
And it's now I know that I'm not a mother, I'm all of those things, but I am a writer. I do have an identity. I've done the work, and I want to help others have what I'm having.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Really. at the end of the day.
Michelle, let's go back to the family's secrets, and if you could tell us a little bit, whatever you're comfortable with telling us about when you found out about your brother.
As a toddler, I found a photo of a baby. I assumed it was me, and I was told, no, we had a baby before we had you, but he died soon after birth, before you were born. And I believed that till I was 18. But can you imagine, I was living in a household with a mother, so I was the replacement baby. He was born in the September of one year, I was born in the December of the following year. And when I was in year 12, matric in those days, I needed my birth certificate to university applications. When I saw my birth certificate, I saw, yes, that there had been a boy born before me, but there was no date of death. So I asked, please explain. And I was told that he had been born with profound Down syndrome, and that my parents had been recommended to have him put into a home, which in those days was Kew Cottages, some of you are probably familiar with. And that's where he spent his life in care. They would not enter any conversation with me about Down syndrome. And really in those days, people with Downs were still being referred to as Mongols. Yeah. That was all I knew. And then when I was engaged to be married at one stage, I said to my mother, well, I didn't. I said to a doctor, I'm a little worried that I may have a child with Downs or something else. And it was recommended I have a genetic test through a genetic clinic. I rang the clinic and said, what do I need? They said, we just need a blood sample from you and one from your brother. So I rang my mother and said, can you help me? Is he still alive? Where is he? Don't know. So then I rang Kew Cottages, no one here by that name, no record of Scheibner, because it can be misspelt and it can be mispronounced, we've come to learn, not uncommon. So that question was never resolved for me. And both my parents died. And then in 12 years ago, a friend who was into genealogy was asking me, you're an only child. Well, no, there was a child born before me. And she just went down every nook and cranny and found him.
Did you ask her to do that?
No, she volunteered.
Right.
And it took, because I didn't have a death certificate, so she was pretty certain that he wasn't. She'd went to births, deaths and marriages. Yeah. There was no. So long story short, she found him and he was in care in Ararat. And everyone's going to ask me, did I go and see him? Did I ever meet him? You've got to read the book. Think like that.
Nicely done.
And I think what I would say is, I said earlier my mother was stoic. Did I mention she was very compliant to my father's wishes and to her sister's wishes, to everyone's wishes? And I was raised to be very compliant. So whenever I asked a question, I was met with silence and I complied. Mm-hmm. So when they said, well, we don't know, I just assumed they didn't know. I trusted that. Mm. And that also meant that I trusted their decision that they'd done the right thing for them and for me. And that's very hard to break that. At the end of the day, you're still loyal to your mother. Our relationships with our mother, it's our first blueprint for future relationships. And in my relationship with my mother, I didn't learn how to advocate for myself. I didn't learn boundaries. I didn't learn how to state my needs. I didn't learn how to communicate and have difficult conversations. And I went on to have a number of unsatisfactory and toxic relationships, keeping myself small and hidden, like my brother was hidden, like my heritage was hidden. And that requires a fair bit of explaining, but I try to explain in the book. One of the themes that we see when there is ancestral trauma passed down through the generations, and the reason that we want to break the cycle, the reason these books are written, the reason people like me are talking about this is so we do break the cycle, is that when you are a replacement baby, when you've been raised as an only child, as I was, when the firstborn was a male, it would seem that one of the themes that, because I've, by the way, since trained in inherited family trauma to understand this so I can work with others, but what we see is, in my case, I have identified with the person that was missing from the family system. And what my brother had, I was not going to have. And I haven't got any children to break the cycle with, but I can help others break it.
That's right. But that's
and
important.
I can tell the story and break it that way.
Yes.
Yes.
True. If we look at where you are now, Michelle, and that's still like I'm still so conscious when I first read the book, that list of all the things that you said, you know, where's my validation? Single, childless, voiceless, alone, familyless. Like I just had never thought of that or you or like that before. And it was just a stark reminder of how important it is to feel good about yourself and where you fit in the world, isn't it? And as you're getting older, all of us are getting older, things change, even like going to work. You know, that identity that we all know where we fit. I had a friend sitting at my kitchen table the other day saying, I'm too scared to give up work because I don't know who I'll be if I don't go to work. Those sorts of things, isn't it?
Yep.
So I just think, you know, reading the book like it took me and Paul on a journey as well, and other family members on a journey, and so much that we learnt as well that we didn't know about, but certainly got us thinking and talking and questioning. And then I just thought, so for you were in your darkest spot, but by doing something about it, you've been so courageous and creating this new opportunity for yourself and others. Thank you. That's sort of what I was thinking, like that is so brave. You could have stayed in your room and done nothing about trying to make a fist of it.
Well, I think one of the things I recognised is that whilst I inherited my father's melancholy and grief and sadness and loss, I also inherited his bravery and his courage. Spending 2 years in the internment camp when he got to Australia, thinking this was going to be the new life, where he was in a camp with Nazis, being bullied, and then going on and making a life here. He was very brave and very courageous. So I did inherit that.
Certainly.
My mother's shame and grief, but nevertheless her resilience and her empathy for others and her compassion. So that I choose to focus on those things now, not the other stuff that kept me in a very dark place for a very long time. And look, I was still showing up looking fabulous, but you know, it's what you do when you go home.
That's right. And that I think was the eye-opener as well, because to us, you always were brave and strong and out there and had it together. That other part that you were struggling with just didn't surface. So I guess in 2024, I just thought, well, what are some of the titles that you'd have now, some of those labels? I wrote down a couple that I thought. I still think even when our parents passed, we're still a daughter, aren't we? I mean, my parents have died, probably a number of people. You're still a daughter. They're just heavenly parents. You're a sister and you were a partner to Chris. Now, as we've moved on just in 8 years, author. Look at you go. I think to people who get to read the book, even just people who meet you and know you and your friends, family, role model. And then, not that I'm a bit older than, than I probably want to be, but this new word, influencer, I think really like in many ways a 2021 word, a 21st century word, influencer. Yeah. I think that what you shared with us is now you are influencing people and the way we think about who we are, don't you think? Well,
that's my purpose.
Wow, there you go.
I think one of the fears I unearthed during this process was that when I die, it was going to be like I'd never been here, like I'd never existed.
I know, that was so sad when you wrote that.
But now, that's changed.
Yeah, but isn't that marvellous though?
Isn't it? Oh, I think it's fabulous.
Yeah. No, but it is, isn't it? How powerful is that?
And it's, it's going to make a difference for people.
Yes, but it's making a difference for you too, like however long you've got left.
Yeah, I think this little girl is, like when you look at me then, you think, oh, gosh, geez, it was all a bit ordinary, a lot of it. But now I look at that and I think, well, maybe that's not such a look of, I don't know, sadness. Maybe it's just a look of waiting.
Yes.
Here we go. Our time will come.
Yes.
Our time will eventually come.
Another word that I thought I would never forget, sister-in-law.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Sister-in-law.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I know you've got some awesome friends. Okay, so and I think the friendships you have with your friends is so important, isn't it? And we've got to work on those all the time. So where to from here, do you think, Michelle?
More of these events.
Okay, yes. So you like this, don't you?
Well, I just want to speak to as many people as I can. That's what this is about now. It really is. I talk about my work now more as guided mentorship than coaching. And, I just want to be that person that can illuminate the path for somebody else because, how do we know when this stuff is going on? Well, it's those sort of repeating patterns in our lives. I have many of those. It's the complaints that we have about others. It's who do we blame and why? It's the we see this play out in relationships, health and money. When we are not attending to this stuff, when there is something coming down ancestrally, being inherited, that's how we see it show up. So this isn't just about being a detective of your family. This is about how can I attract some better stuff into my life, get rid of the complaint, stop the repeating pattern, stop that next bad relationship, do some healing and break the cycle. Then everyone's going to be happier. There'll be a greater sense of belonging. I now feel I belong. For so many years I didn't belong. Now I belong. And I'm sure I'm going to find others like me that have a similar story.
Yeah, but I think you've already found that, haven't you? People have contacted you about that as well, haven't they?
Yeah,
the voice.
Yeah. But I think even so, in that 2016, I had good friends and I had, kind of extended family in a sense. But all of those people had their connections.
Yes.
Either their own children or their siblings or their parents still alive or had come from big, and I didn't have any of those things. So I didn't have anything to anchor to.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's anchored in here.
Isn't that marvellous? Well, one of the sayings, in the middle of a difficulty lies opportunity. And Michelle, I think this is so what that story is about, isn't it?
It is.
You have made
It is.
the most of that and taken a great opportunity here, one that not everyone would be brave enough to take. So thank you.
I hope I can show them that you can be brave.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I'm sure your parents are very proud of you.
I think so.
And I know Chris would be.
I think so.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, he would. Yeah. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, okay? Yeah. All right. So, we're having questions and, So is there anyone who would like to ask a question now? Would be an opportunity, and then we're going to have, you can have a chit-chat to Michelle if you'd like. You can have a bio book, have a signing of the book, whatever you need. We can do all that.
We can do all that. I continued to work with Sarah while I was writing the book because we remember what we remember, and it's our version of the truth. And I was also going to be writing about a couple of relationships that were pretty, toxic and violent. And so I was also, it was all rather complex. So I would say if you're going to write about trauma in this way, that you ensure that you have a framework of people, or at least somebody around you that you can talk this through with. Well, I did actually go away and learn how to write memoir in between my second and third manuscript, which it's not. It would have been much easier if I just stuck to a business book, which was my intention at the beginning.
Oh, right.
Writing memoir is very difficult. And one of the things we learn is that this is not about pity. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I want people just to be able to make up their own mind. So I had to learn how to write and show you, the readers, what was happening without editorialising about it or without having an opinion about it. And so, but in order to get to that part when you write it, you kind of write it in your first version will be that raw stuff. So I used Sarah, the narrative therapist. I continued to test that with her. And I also joined a writing group and had accountability buddies within that so that I could remember what I was doing. I am a fan of journaling. And a lot of the research I was doing at the time was about how do we heal attachment trauma, the break with the mother part. And so I was reading about it while I was writing. And so understanding some of those, how to break the loop. And a lot of that is around journaling. And we use a visualisation mindfulness practice once we have the resolution with the missing family members. And so I was also very present to that. And I touch on that in the book. So I do kind of address that a little bit in the book, but it is a really important thing before you go off and think you're going to write. I use an A3 sketch pad. I use that a lot with my clients when we're doing identity work. And I started using it differently when I was uncovering all these different theories when I was reading. And I'd talk about mind mapping, which is my version is, for example, childless, I would write that in the middle of the page in a colour. And then I would have little arms going off that, little spidery arms, and write down, for example, what did that mean for me to be childless, to have that identity, to be childless? And then familyless. And so I'd start thinking through a lot of this and capturing it, handwriting it, because you access a different part of your brain when you do this with pen and paper rather than on a page, on a computer. But then when I was armed with my DNA results and letters that I'd uncovered between my parents and all, I had, because my work had been around personality profiling and, understanding a lot of different ways we do profile people, I kind of went back to the iceberg, because with an iceberg, the 1/8 at the top is what the world sees. So people were seeing this 1/8 of me showing up, but they didn't see what was going on underneath. And so I had the professional me at the top, and I realised that, of course, my DNA sits at the bottom. So everything about who I am starts with what I inherited, and I built it up from that. And once you start doing that and you look for intersections and themes, you understand the gifts you truly do have, because nobody else has those intersections. Nobody has the same identity story as we do. And it's more than whatever your DNA says. It's more than what your personality or your eye colour. It's what you've lived, and it's what's been passed down. It's all I love it. I love getting other people to do it. When Paul and I were working on Chris's house, I would regale him over coffee with stories of my life. And I think he was a bit aghast at some of them. I said, you really ought to write a book. And that just stuck with me for no other reason than it was like, what else? It was COVID. And my business it gone off, because I'm very much an in-person business, and we were locked down in Melbourne, and I'm a coach, and so I was either going to do it on Zoom or whatever. So my business was a bit stalled, and I thought, I've got time, and maybe I can relaunch my career when we come out of COVID, and I'll talk about how we can use personal brand to whatever, I don't know. I really didn't know I didn't know what I was in for, let me say, when I started. I had written the chapter, I'd contributed to an anthology of women in leadership stories about when we'd been faced with something in life and said, why not, and went ahead and did it anyway. So I had done that. So I was, I'd edited the school magazine. I'd been writing poetry from as early as I could remember, but writing memoirs, that was another thing altogether. So it just kind of happened. Yeah. And there was enough there in place for it to make sense. I liked speaking. Two different things. I didn't know that until I started. But by the time I got to writing, I had processed that anger. And this was it, of course there was. I didn't have any photos of my parents in the house. I just didn't. No, I had no family stories. That sort of thing of hearing about your mother's first boyfriend, or, talking about what your dad did when he was in grade 6. I didn't have any of those stories, but I didn't know I didn't have them.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativecloons.org.au.